Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to talk about formatting your different type styles, working with different fonts and the different font properties on our page. So I'm going to go ahead and come into my style sheet right here, and I'm actually going to scroll up here to the top and just give myself a little bit of space in between the wrapper style and the body style. And I'm going to go ahead and create, well, first of all, actually, I'm going to save that. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in our browser. And you can see the type style that's coming up here by default. And sort of this Times New Roman style. And when we look at our actual design, we can see that the type style is different. It's more of an Arial style. It isn't actually Arial, but it definitely looks different from what we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and again come back into my style sheet here. And let's say I want to set the font style for my main headings on my page. And in this case, I'm using actually 3 levels of headings. H1s, H2s, and H3s. And we can see on our page here I've got an H1 here, an H2 here. And we go into our right-hand sidebar, we've got some more H2s. And actually, it looks like I'm not using any H3s. But we might use H3s later on. So we're going to include those in the styling. And you remember, we don't have to set up individual styles for each one of these heading levels if we don't want to. If we want to use the same font styling for all 3 of our heading levels, we can use what's called a group selector. And you remember we did that by typing H1, comma, space, H2, comma, space, and then H3. And then whatever property value statements I enter in, those will be applied to all 3 of those elements. And since we do want to use the same font for each one of those, we are going to make them a group selector. But when it comes to the actual font size, well, that is going to be different for our different fonts, or for our different heading levels here. And actually, it's going to be different if we go ahead and look at our completed project here. It's going to be different depending on whether it's in the sidebar or in the main area, or whether it's in a box here. So the different font sizes could vary based on where they actually are on our page. So those we're going to make individual styles, and we'll see how to do that in a little bit. But for right now, I just want to talk about the actual font that we're going to use. And the property in CSS that we use to set the font style, or I shouldn't say the font style, but the font face, is going to be the font family property. And when I type in that property and do a colon, Dreamweaver, as normal, brings up some suggestions for the values for that property. And you can see them all listed here. You're also going to notice that I've got an edit font list option here. We're going to talk about that later. But you're going to notice I've got a variety of different options here that I can select. And I'm going to click on this one here. It says Arial, Helvetica, Common, Sans Serif. And so you're going to notice that I've actually placed 3 different font names in my font for my font family property Arial, Helvetica, and sans serif. And the reason why I have 3 different values here is that in order for a browser to display a font, that font needs to be loaded onto the visitor or the viewer's computer. Now, not every computer is going to have the font Arial loaded on it. Very good example of this would be older Macintoshes. Older Mac computers don't have the font Arial. Newer ones do, but older ones don't. So if we just specified the font to be Arial here instead of all 3 of those values, if the browser that's looking at your website doesn't have Arial, it's going to go to whatever the browser default is, which in this case is that Times New Roman font. But since we actually put in several values here, what the browser is going to do is it's going to check first to see if the computer has access to a font called Arial. If it does, it'll use that as our first choice. If not, it's going to look and see if the computer or the browser has access to a font called Helvetica. And again, this isn't on your computer. This is on the visitor's computer, the person who's browsing to your website. So that's the second option. And in the case of older Macintoshes, they do have a font called Helvetica. So it's going to use that, which is very similar to Arial. We can't just use Helvetica, though, because a lot of Windows-based PCs don't have a font. Actually, most Windows PCs don't have a font called Helvetica. And then finally, if we don't have access to either Helvetica or Arial, it's going to default to a font called sans serif, which is a widely used system font that's loaded onto almost every single computer that could use a browser. So whether it's a Windows PC, a Mac, a newer Mac, an older Mac, a Linux computer, doesn't matter, sans serif will be available for you. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's go ahead and preview this in our browser, and we can now see that all of our headings are using that font. Our paragraphs aren't, but our headings are. So the important point to take away from this is that if you're going to use a font on your web page, you need to make sure that the font you specify is available on any computer that might browse to your website. Which means that if all you're using is CSS, you have a very limited selection of fonts that you can choose from. Basically, you've got the Arial Helvetica family, you've got the Times New Roman, Times Georgia family, which is that serif font, and that's usually the default font for most browsers. You've got another font family called Verdana that is fairly common. You've got a font family called Courier, which is that typewriter looking font, and that's about it. So in and of itself, CSS really limits you as to the types of fonts that you can, or the font faces that you can use. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other options. There are lots of ways to make different kinds of fonts available to your visitors as they browse your website, even if they're not loaded onto the system. And The two most common ways of doing that are using something called @FontFace or using some sort of JavaScript or font service to supply that font to the visitor. Now, there are lots of websites out there that have @FontFace fonts available to download that you can include on your site. And there are lots of JavaScript tools that are out there. And there are also lots of font serving utilities that are out there. One is not necessarily better than the other. They all basically do the same thing, just in a different way. The way that I like to supply my fonts to individuals is to use a font serving service. And the one that I like to use is Google Web Fonts. And you can see the web address to this website that you're going to go to for these fonts right here. Now, Google right now, as I'm making this video, has 617 fonts available. And the advantage of Google Web Fonts over other services that are offered by Microsoft and Adobe and other providers is that these are always going to be free for you. So you never have to worry about paying for a font. You never have to worry about accidentally using a copyrighted font mistakenly. And also, since it's Google, you know that it's always going to be there. Whereas other font serving services have gone offline. And if that happens, then you're back to whatever the default fonts are that were available to you. So I like using Google Web Fonts. So let's see how we would use a Google Web Font to get a font that's a little bit more attractive than Arial. Arial's a pretty blah font. And you can see the one that I'm using in our completed project right here. It looks like Arial, but it's a lot cleaner in its appearance. And if I'm in Google Web Fonts here, you can search for a font name, or you can filter your fonts and search and browse for a font that you want. For example, I can click this drop down for all categories here, and I can search for just serif fonts, just sans serif fonts, display type fonts, or handwriting type fonts. But since I know the font that I want to use, and it's well worth your time to go in and look at the different kinds of fonts that are in here, to sort of get an idea of the ones that you like. The font that I want to actually use is called Open Sans. Open Sans. And I need to zoom out here a little bit. And there's two versions of this, Open Sans and Open Sans Condensed. And you can see there's actually 3 styles of Open Sans Condensed and 10 styles of the regular Open Sans font that's available for you. And I want to grab both of these fonts so that we can use them on our web page. Another font that I really like is called Roboto. And it also has a regular version and a condensed version that have multiple styles in them. So if you're looking at 2 fonts that are extremely usable for your designs, I would recommend you look at Open Sans and Roboto. And you're going to see here for Open Sans, I've got an option here for Quick Use. I want to go ahead and click that. And you can see I've got different weights and styles for the font here. And the weights are signified with numbers. and the styles, if they're available, are labeled as italic. Now, the more fonts that you load, the longer time, or the more fonts you select here, the longer it's going to take the page to load. So Google really has a handy little page load gauge here that'll help you see if you've selected a lot or just a few fonts as far as their download time goes. And this is, as bandwidth is increasing and people's internet speeds go up, this is becoming less and less important. But still, as a general rule, if you're not going to use a font, don't load it. And I want to use, since I'm going to use this font not only for my headings, but also for my paragraph text, I'm going to select normal and book here. And since I want to use it for my headings, I'm also going to select semi-bold and bold. I don't really want to use extra bold, so that I'm going to leave that off. And I'm actually not going to use the italics versions in any of my headings, so I'm going to leave those off as well. But I may want to use the italics in my paragraphs. So I'm going to select the italicized version of both of those fonts there. And you can see my page load here isn't too terribly bad. Now I'm going to scroll down, and you're going to see a section here that says add this code to your website, and you're going to see a link statement right here. What you want to do is you want to highlight this, and then right click, and you can highlight it just by triple clicking on it, and then right click and copy it. And then I'm going to go back into my HTML. This doesn't go in your CSS, this actually goes in your HTML. And in my head section, I'm going to add the link to that font. And you can see here that it's going to load these particular font styles onto my page. And again, this works exactly like the link we used when we were loading our style sheet up. We've got an href that points to the actual document. We've got a relationship as well as a type statement. We actually don't have the media attribute on there. We don't actually need that for this one. But in any case, Google supplies you with the code for your HTML. Now I'm going to come back in here. So we've added that. And then we have step 4, integrate the fonts into your CSS. And we have this right here. And again, I'm going to highlight that and copy this. And then go back into my go back into Dreamweaver and go into my CSS file. Now, you need to actually specify the name of the font that you want to use in the style that's using that font. And what I usually do here, Dreamweaver put this comment up at the top, is I usually put an area up here at the top in comments brackets, and the comment bracket is the slash and an asterisk for the opening and an asterisk and a slash to close. And this is where I put different kinds of notes for myself. For example, later we're going to need to work with colors. And so I may need some color values and a place to put a note in for my color values. In this case, I'm just going to paste that font family in there so that all I have to do now is highlight just this first element right here. The apostrophe, the name of the font, the closing apostrophe, a comma, a space. I don't need the sans serif or the semicolon, and I don't need the property. all I need to do is highlight that, copy it, and then come back down in here into the actual style and paste that font name in. So the browser will first look and see if it has access to Open Sans. If it does, which it should, it will use that. If not, it'll look for Arial, then it'll look for Helvetica, then it'll look for sans serif. Let's go ahead and save that. And now let's go ahead and preview this in Chrome. And you can see that my font is a little bit different now from what it was before. Let's go ahead and grab the second font, this Open Sans Condensed, which is actually the font that we're going to go ahead and use. And again, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Quick Use to the right of the font name. And I just want book and bold here. I'm not going to use the italicized version of that. And then I'm going to come down here and grab this code, copy it, go back into my HTML, give myself some space in my head section, and then paste it in there. And again, I'm going to indent that over. So now I have access to that second font, but I need to go ahead and grab the font name also. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this and copy it. And I'm going to paste this right in there. And now I'm going to highlight that, copy it, and whoops, went too far down there, and paste that in for my headings. And now let's go ahead and go into Chrome and take a look and see how that's going to appear. And now you can see it looks like our example does. So Google Web Fonts really gives you the ability to use a wide variety of fonts in your design. And again, this is something that definitely you should take some time to look through the different font families that Google has available here for you. Another font family that I like, that I think you ought to look, is called PT. And PT, actually, there's 24 font families here. We've got this typewriter font that isn't too terribly useful, but we've got a sans font, another version of their sans font, a narrow or condensed version of their sans font, and then we have some serif versions of their font. So, and there are some others that are down below that. But if you're looking for a serif font that has this, by the way, if you ever see a font that says sans serif, look at the ends of the strokes on the font. And you can see this is a sans serif font. And this is an example of a serif font. Serif fonts have the little hooks on the ends of the strokes, whereas sans serif fonts do not. And that's probably the biggest difference between, or the largest difference between different types of fonts, whether they're a serif font or whether they're a sans serif font. But definitely worth your time looking through the fonts that Google will make available to you here. In the next video, we're going to talk about something that, again, is very important. And we're going to do that before we start working with font colors and sizes and things like that. We're going to talk about previewing your website in different browsers and some of the different things that you need to be aware of when you're starting to fine-tune the look of your design. So again, the next video may not seem important to you. It may seem very simple, just how to preview your web pages, but there are actually a bunch of very important details that you want to take into consideration with that. So definitely take a look at the next video. So I'll see you then.